We're back with the news, which is actually going really well. I think most of this is pretty positive, leaning into it. There's some negative, of course, being the video game industry. We're going to have some stuff, but we have some continuing stuff that I think is really cool, and some mixed bag stuff. But let's get right into it and talk about it. Uh, Ubisoft has decided to kind of carve out a unit, a subsidiary with their three biggest titles or franchises at this point, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, which Tencent then invested about 1.16 billion to acquire a 25% stake into the new entity, which will have licenses for the intellectual property in exchange for a royalty and so on and so forth. There's a lot going into this overall. I think it's really sad to see Tencent actually have a stake. I feel like Tencent's one of the worst companies to have any part of any video game at all be a part of it. It's not that they've done only bad. It's just it's like the Embracer Group and Tencent. There's just a lot of problems with them, but it. I feel like this is a move that was kind of expected. I did say that I was hoping that they wouldn't actually like fade away, like Ubisoft wouldn't be completely bought out. And so this is kind of good news. I don't think Ubisoft deserves to be completely gone, at least in my opinion. So it's okay to kind of have this. I'm kind of scared what this means for a lot of other video game companies that maybe are struggling in a similar vein. And I really hope that we don't get a massive company like Tencent that ends up just kind of taking 25%, 25%, 15, 10 for a bunch of these, because I feel like they're not a great company for creative. And I hope I'm glad they did a clean separation as well for like these three bigger series, because I feel like that's one where most of their value comes from, but two, it doesn't completely cripple some of the other IPs Ubisoft has in their back pocket. It's an interesting way to go about it. I don't think it's ever been done in the way that it is. There's been stuff where like there's companies that own like 49%, or they'll even own 60% of the company at the stake. We've seen it with what was of the old term for second party video game studios, but second parties don't really exist anymore because they trade hands too often. But now I'm interested to see how this will work out, because it's not like the Ubisoft in general is been kind of wiped into this. It's just specifically Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six, which is, you know, odd that they would completely separate Rainbow Six, but at the same time it makes sense because there's a lot of Tom Clancy stuff to go into. So interesting news, kind of continuation of the Ubisoft stuff I've talked about before, but yeah, we'll see what happens. We have a quick note for all Metroid fans out there, myself included. Metroid Prime 4 got a bit of a trailer thing on the Nintendo Direct that happened almost a week ago at this point. It just happens to be the odd thing where Wednesdays don't line up well. Uh, and it looks really good. And one of the comments I saw was actually kind of an irritated comment, being that uh, why Pokemon games are so ugly if they can make Prime 4 look pretty damn neat. And that has a lot to do with just probably the timeline of these games. But if you're a Metroid fan, I do recommend checking out the trailer to see if it's more your shtick. Metroid Prime in general is a very good video game series. It suffers from a bit of combat problems even in almost every entry, but I think the rest of it is just a love letter to Metroid fans. So overall, very nice to see. I'm a Metroid fan, so I'll probably get it. Yeah. One of the scariest things about video game studios and video game development, the community, the entire business, is starting to lose and fading away into not only obscurity but being defunct. And it looks like Cyan World is starting. a final gamble, as we'll call it. If you don't know, Cyan Worlds is one of the oldest and longest surviving indie game companies in the world. They made a lot of PC classics, Myst, Riven, so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff that they've been a part of, uh, and they have cut about their company in half, which is really, really, as in this quote, throughout the past year, we have been ultra transparent with the entire Cyan team about the choppy waters we find ourselves in, as well as the dangers ahead. While the news of a layoff was not a surprise on the team, it was and is still deeply saddening for all of us. But they're trying to find financing for our next project, restabilize the studio. Been around a very long time and have been through rough times before. Our sincere hope is to continue to be around and provide types of experiences that only Cyan can deliver. Now, that's not to say that Cyan is one of the greatest companies in the world. Uh, I the the problem with something like Cyan Worlds here is that I feel like it's a very aged company. It's one of those companies that never really made the transition to being uh, like it never brought anything new to the table. I believe their last one was Firmament was their last entry, but I think that was like 2 3 years ago. And I just think it was for a lot of people they viewed it as mediocre to mid. Even if it was, in my opinion, it was like a good entry, but it wasn't a standout. It didn't like make a lot of like it didn't make a lot of impact and get a lot of sales for a new series, and so they went the remake route, which Riven is. I think it was last summer it got the remake or whatever, and they were hoping that would carry them. It's just they're not making anything that is going to get a lot of new faces into the series they make, which is ultimately the biggest problem. If you're not getting new people, new consumers that talk about the games, that bring new light to it. A great example I always bring up, and this is not to say that Rockstar is a small company like Cyan in comparison, but you look at something like Red Dead Redemption. A lot of people could not tell you when, what, and even what Red Dead Revolver is. But with Red Dead Redemption 1's success, a lot more eyes were brought forth onto that game, just as an example. And that's also direct ties. A lot of people got really into Grand Theft Auto because it was similar to Red Dead Redemption. A very interesting thing about every like big Rockstar game is that a lot of people like to look back at the weird stuff Rockstar has been a part of. There's ping pong, for instance, Rockstar ping pong, really wild. But then there's stuff like Max Payne that has just been missed out on. It's like that with a bunch of other companies too. You kind of a lot of people will go around and with the we'll talk about it literally next, but with Capcom a lot of people like to look at past Monster Hunters and just kind of take a look at them, maybe not play them, maybe not buy new copies, especially since a lot of them are not available in unless you're paying a lot, but like they like to explore, and then that leads to other entries such as Mega Man. Especially Mega Man is a great one to always be able to recommend because it's so cheap to get a collection now. You find it on sale for $5 and you get, I mean, look at like Legacy Collection 1, you get 6 games. It's just insane to think that like if you make a good entry, you make a new IP, draws in new consumers. If they're brand new to anything you've ever done, it's a chance to continue more value from the consumer. That's why you need to make a fantastic product, especially for big companies now. It's one of those things where video games have been around. These aren't new. These aren't new series. These aren't new mechanics. That yeah, you can kind of change up old mechanics to bring something fresh and new to get new consumers, and you have to do that. But the thing is, if you're not doing that, you lose because you need to get those new consumers that haven't been hooked by a video game yet. They aren't a TF2 player. They aren't a Destiny player. They aren't League of Legends. There's a bunch of people that just don't play video games, and it's one of those things where you need to find something unique, something marketable, that you can push into their laps and be like, hey, do you want to play this? And don't get me wrong, not everybody is going to tune themselves to it, especially non-video game players. But you have a consumer base that is already used to a lot of different video game mechanics, a lot of different settings, a lot of different storytelling. You need to go after new consumers while catering to the old ones so you can get enough money from the old ones to the new consumers to break into very, very nice profits. And it feels like Cyan Worlds just has failed entirely on getting that for probably the past decade and a half. Yeah, it also sucks that first person point and click is basically an archaic uh, like genre. I know I know it's not technically what the genre is, but yeah, it's just uh overall we'll see what happens with Cyan Worlds. It would really suck to see him go. Any video game studio being like that is terrible. Basically talking about Monster Hunter real quick. Monster Hunter Wilds breezes past 10 million sold. This is kind of why I skipped out on talking about it almost a couple weeks ago when it was at 1 month. I wanted to see the numbers, and it passed 10 million. And Capcom kind of goes into one of the cool things about Capcom in recent years is it really feels like they're trying to understand video game marketing and video game like consumer like trends. And they seem to actually like kind of hunker down and get really good at like explaining why maybe they succeed or fail and being able to explain realistically why that is. If you haven't taken a check at some of the Capcom like investor meetings, very hilarious like writing and answers to some of the questions, very funny. Overall, I'm really liking how Capcom is acting. Don't get me wrong, they're still a video game business, and that can lead to some shady shit. But I feel like Capcom is actually like in the right mindset to succeed in this generation of uncertainty in development and the economic downturn that we're going to face. So we'll see what happens though. But passing 10 million, uh, it apparently sold 8 million copies in just 3 days, which is insane. It's actually insane. It is the fastest selling game in Capcom history, which they've already had a pretty stacked lineup before. And another thing to point out is that that's 2 million more units, or maybe 3 million. There's not an exact number yet, but there's 2 million, at least 2 million more units brought forth in this same month, which means that 8 million copies were sold, and a lot of people celebrated it, brought forth to other people, and 2 million more people bought it, or they finally could. And this also has to do with, as they point out in their little interview talking about it, is that crossplay and day one launch across all console and PC is probably the key factor to it. It's very nice to have all that crossplay being enabled super early, and at the same time having a PC entry for such a big game be immediate is really, really important. Just for example, I think they touch on this, but World launched like 8 months uh, after the console version for PC. So it was a decent little drought that PC players had to go through. And I think probably PC players make up the most of the player base at this point. But another cool thing is that a lot of people are excited for the first title update for Monster Hunter Wilds, which launches April 4th. Apparently, we're going to have a fan favorite monster and new in-game settlement. I know there's actually uh, like footage of this. I haven't had a chance to check it out, and I haven't had a chance to play the game, but I am excited to see a great game succeed like this. Monster Hunter has kind of, I've already made my entries, I've already done my work for Monster Hunter as a game series. I'm just glad people are getting into it now, because I do think it's a great game series. It's just, I've done my time for it. But speaking of other games, Unimusha Way of the Sword is confirmed to be linear progression, which is a very odd choice nowadays. Usually it's open world, but about 20 hours of playtime and enough bloodshed for 18 plus rating. So when it comes down to it, it will stick to the roots, which is nice. Linear story / stage progression, which I enjoy. I think open world is a very, very tired out setting slash genre slash whatever you want to call it. And uh, one of the things that I'm excited to see is how they introduce the newer puzzles because as like the more recent ones, not recent, but the last one, which is forever ago at this point, started introducing like weird puzzles to kind of change up the action sequences. Now, I'm not really sure if this means that we will see more Way of the Sword, like just oriented stuff. Like it seems like it's gonna have more gameplay mechanics kind of added, and if it's gonna focus inherently on that, or if it's gonna go classic like Unimusha like style. And I know I'm saying that wrong by the way, but it's just how I grew up saying it. But overall, I'm actually kind of excited to see how this kind of shapes up. It's scheduled to release 2026, which I don't like early announcements, so it's kind of irritating. But hey, that's the way it be. We have more Netflix being dumbasses. Netflix is one of the dumbest companies in the world. You have everything in the palm of your hand, and you just can't seem to understand that you have a palm at all. But one of the things that they kind of set out, or they said, is looking at the younger generation. Are 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds dreaming of owning a PlayStation 6? I am not sure. Now, I'm going to be the one to say this. Um, 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds is like one probably when they might start getting into video game announcements in general. Just for example, mine's a little bit early, of course, but I started following video game news right around 2006, 2007. I wasn't a big follower of it because I was young. I was like 9, 8, for example. But I started following the news and getting pretty hyped for specific games, and I would save up money. And I went to a couple midnight releases with my parent at the time or my older brothers, and those are memories that I'll always cherish. Like they're very special. Uh, and one of the things that I think is really just stupid to state is that new consoles are always going to be hyped, whether they are needed or not. I feel like this current generation we're in is probably the most unneeded console generation to have ever existed, uh, and I think it's really a struggle to say that nobody's going to be excited for a PlayStation 6 because we already see, as we'll talk about in a minute, Switch 2 is very, very hyped. And I think even the younger kids that necessarily don't follow it, I, I just don't. I don't see them not dreaming of this. I see it as being the Christmas present to look forward to, the birthday gift that maybe they can help pay and do chores for. Like all kids always want to touch the brand new console and play a game that they heard about at school. My older brother got to play. This can make me sound old. My older brother got to play Assure's Wrath. I want to play that, and it doesn't matter if it's E-rated, T-rated, M-rated. If someone older is playing it and they have an interest, they want it. They want it so badly, and I think at this point, it doesn't matter if it's a console. It doesn't matter if it's a game. It doesn't matter if it's DLC. Kids are always going to look forward to stuff because they don't really understand quality at first glance, and it takes a bit for them to understand that. So saying this statement makes me feel like Netflix, of course, is back at to being really, really stupid. But that's, of course, the president of the games division. Uh, yeah. But next, we're going to end off on the final thing. I was going to have something in the, between all these, but I think it's fine if I don't. The Nintendo Switch 2 arrives on June 5th for $449.99. Now, one of the things that's very interesting is there's a separate price for the Japanese model, Japanese exclusive model, versus a multi language model. Something very interesting to put forth. And I think a lot of people have theories of why. Maybe it's like to prevent a lot of like tourists being able to like take it home and stuff. I think it's a scalper issue. I think Nintendo is trying to reduce the amount of scalpers that kind of punish not only Japan but other places in the world. It just happens to be they're trying it out with Japan because it's their their home country. So I think that's what they're trying to do. We'll probably actually see at some point maybe like a version like exclusive to regions. Is region locked to Japanese only, which is interesting. And I wonder if the multi language means that it won't be like region locked. It's sad to see region lock coming back, but then again, whew, I'm not gonna lie, I hate scalpers. So, but there's a bunch of games that are also getting lifted to the new Switch 2 quality. There's the Switch 2 camera stuff, which looks very interesting. Uh, there's going to be GameCube games for Switch 2. Man, there's a lot going on with the Switch 2. It's very exciting. I'm excited to see how this is looking. It looks like they're really going as hard to the paint as possible. You, of course, have Mario Kart World, which launches exclusively on the Switch 2 on June 5th. And I think uh, if it's as good as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was to the Switch, we have another groundbreaking game. It does have some weird stuff like an open world mode, uh, and time of day and weather conditions. We'll see what happens. Overall, it's exciting to read about. I feel like this is the perfect time for a Switch too. See, this is I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I feel like just kind of going back to the topic real quick. I feel like the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 came out too early, like for a console generation. I get it; it was technically 7 years for them, which Nintendo's on a different like timeline because of the Wii U and so on and so forth. Uh, but I feel like there wasn't a big jump in improvements. Yes, it got better looking. Yes, there was more power. But I feel like optimization wise, it didn't feel like the Xbox One or the PS4 ever fully got to put down everything they could into a game. Whereas I feel like the Switch pretty much started like that, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it feels like Nintendo is fully doing as much they can on a system before they kind of settle for a new thing. The backwards compatibility with the Switch 2 is also very, very notable. Uh, I think it's one of those things that is going to make this console probably one of the biggest things in the world. Just a great example of why the Wii was super, super amazing is because GameCube buyers didn't feel abandoned with the Wii's release. It seems to be pretty common that backwards compatibility is a big, big, like, just help to keeping the old consumers interested in your newer product. So when you look at something that is too similar, like the Wii U, of course it doesn't work out because they just think it's like an attachment, which the Wii was also casual consumers. But like for people that played the GameCube, the Wii was a great system because yeah, they didn't necessarily need to buy a new game every week to fill out the library. They had their GameCube games. They could be a little slower. They could pick out the ones they wanted. And I feel like overall backwards compatibility is the big money maker for the Switch too. Not that's not also to mention that the upgrades to the looks is finally getting up to well, a lot of people call it the standard. I feel like the standard is a little bit of a misnomer because the standard for a lot of people of what they're willing to accept is a lot lower when they get out their kind of graphics bubble. But we'll see what comes across on the Switch too. I do want to point out the 256 gigabyte of internal storage, which is up from 32 on the original Switch. Glad to see that, but then again, it's also still a similar problem. A lot of these games are massive, so we'll see if that ends up working out. I'm excited for it though. I probably won't get it at launch. I'll probably skip on it because I just don't have time to invest in a new console. But overall, I'm very excited to see what pops up, and I hope a lot of people are excited because I love these early announcements into finally getting the console in your hands within just a 6 month period, basically. Uh, I'm pretty sure the announcement was like 2 months ago, or even less. I don't remember. Uh, so it's very exciting to see announcement to quickly gain your hands on the product. Need more of that. Overall, pretty good day. I think there was a lot of good news, a mix of bad news, but hey, sometimes you just get a good day.